Welcome, everyone. My name is Hakan Adere. I'm a senior technical consultant for SAP Commerce Cloud. And since late 2018, I'm specialized in migrations for the SAP Commerce Cloud. We will talk about the cloud automation engine. Let's get started. Knowing these concepts is useful because for two reasons. One, it gives you a bigger picture of how you deploy your application to CCV2. Two, when we talk about logging and monitoring, right, you will see some IDs and something in Dynatrace or Kibana, and then you will get that, oh, okay, so this ID is actually a Docker container ID, and Dynatrace is actually showing these Docker containers and these hosts on Kubernetes and so on. So that is the reason why I'm talking about, but you don't need to worry about anything. You're not going to configure any kind of a Docker or Kubernetes settings. Dockers are actually enterprise containers. It's a built standard unit of software. So what happens is you put all your dependencies into one container so that once you move the code, your code comes with all the required dependencies. So once you move your build to upper environments, you don't need to worry about installing all these dependencies again and again and again, right? So you do it just once, and then you just promote the same container to higher environments. And Kubernetes is a tool to orchestrate these containers, right? Because as you can see here in these slides, right, this is a different type of container. So there are different kind of container types, right? Plus you say that, okay, I need 2 of these containers, I need 3 of these storefront containers, I need 1 of these storefront Apache containers, and so on. So again, this is a good amount of work to orchestrate these containers, right? And if one of the containers just goes down, then you need to automatically restart that. Instead of doing all these, right, Kubernetes handles everything for you. So again, you don't need to worry about Kubernetes. It is already configured, and all your Docker containers are deployed to the hosts by Kubernetes and are orchestrated by that tool. And the infrastructure what we are using is provided by Microsoft Azure. So the machines that you are getting, the database, the network adapters, we all get all these infrastructure from Microsoft Azure. So basically the cloud platform based on 3 main components. And here you see that this is your infrastructure part of your component, right? So once you create your subscription, you get your own Azure subscription, which contains the disks, virtual machines, load balancers, network interfaces, blob storages, SQL servers, and so on. And what happens is Azure Cloud Platform Engine just sends requests to the Azure platform to configure all these resources on behalf of you, right? So again, this is what happens once your environment is created, right? You're not going to, I'm just showing this screenshot to give you an idea, right? You don't need to worry about any configuration. But what happens in the background is the disk, virtual machines, and everything is created and configured by the Cloud Platform Engine. So once they are configured, now it is ready to deploy the Kubernetes clusters. So let's say that this is a virtual machine, F8 virtual machine, and there are these standard A2 virtual machines. There are different kind of virtual machines. So the Kubernetes cluster sits on top of these virtual machines, and then your Docker containers are deployed into these clusters, right? So how does Cloud Automation Engine does that? So the Cloud Automation Engine, again, you don't need to worry, contains all these processes, right? It is somewhat fault-tolerant provisioning system, right? So if anything happens in one of these steps, basically it can retry it, or it has some checks to do that and replicate that environment. Also, it has the capability to rebuild anything by piece, right? So let's say that there is this logging mechanism, right? Which with the recent release, the logging mechanism is upgraded. So what they can do, they can just re-trigger the logging mechanism build part, right? So let's say that the Kibana version is upgraded, and all they need to is trigger that specific process again to upgrade your Kibana to the latest version, or Dynatrace, whatever version you're using on CCV2. But obviously, they're not going to touch your Commerce Cloud version, right? And this is what you get as a network interface, right? This is your development environment. There are virtual machines, network adapters. This is a simple prod environment. There's also a project environment. You have your own builder, right, in your own subscription. So it sits here, right? And all these database, the blob storage are connected via service endpoints. And then the cloud automation engine, as you can see, sits outside of your infrastructure, right? It connects to your infrastructure and does the configuration, but it is outside of your infrastructure. Is there any way to take backup of some specific tables as per the need in CCV2, or do we need to raise SAP incident for the same? Yes, there is no provided feature to take the backup of a specific table. All you can do is create impexes to export those tables or entities, or you can create a ticket and ask from SAP Cloud Support. The API aspect is supposed to call a third party for payment service, and the payment service needs to know the IPs of the request server for IP listing. If I understand correctly, the auto-scaling might add or remove nodes in API aspect. How can I figure out IP aspect node IPs for whitelisting? Actually, all these nodes, right, they sit in a Kubernetes cluster, right? So they don't have a public IP address. All they have internal IP addresses, right? And if you look at these network infrastructure, all these nodes, they go to internet through the same public IP. So they only have one IP address, right? So they don't, the individual API aspect, back office aspect, whatever aspect it is, right? It doesn't have a public IP address. All of them goes through the same public IP address. So all you need to whitelist is one IP address, and then that is enough. And are there still quarterly releases to Cloud Commerce? No. So right now, the frequency is annual. So Commerce Cloud platform releases is annual. Is there any way to change Tomcat server property in CCV2? There are some managed properties that you can't change in CCV2, like the database URL and database password and username, right? Because you are provided with a database and we don't allow you to change the database username and password. The same applies for Tomcat. Most of the Tomcat properties are not available for change. Thank you everyone for again joining.